live from New York. It's Saturday night!
Except this is 242 at home, which of course you can watch live or on demand.
I don't know what got into me. You could watch this on a Saturday night, you could be watching it on a Monday night, whatever. Either way, you're watching 242 at home. And this week we're going to be starting a brand new series called Summer of Serving.
That's right. And on June 5th, we kicked off our season-long focus on serving with our first big Serve event.
This series goes hand in hand with our mission this summer. Serving isn't just a thing we do, it's actually the nature of God, and it's what ultimately sets Christians apart as unique.
Yep, and in just a bit, we'll hear from Kevin. He's talking about how being a servant isn't just something God does, it's actually who He is.
So let's start things off with some worship.
This love, oh, it's moving all my mountains. His perfect love is casting out hard fear. How great this love, oh, it welcomes me like family. Everywhere I go, it meets me there. He is good, and He is God. What I've earned is not what I've got, and He is just, and oh so kind. What I deserve is not what I find. What more could I say about Him? My God is love. How great this love, oh, it's faithful through my failures. His trusted love is with me till the end. How great this love, oh, it's closer than a brother. This is love. He died so I could live. He is good. He is God. What I've earned is not what I've got, and He is just, oh so kind. What I deserve is not what I find. What more could I say about it? My God is love. Oh, He is love.
You're never gonna let me down. You're never gonna let me down. You're never gonna let me down. You're never gonna You're never gonna let me down. 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 You're never gonna let me down.
'Cause you are good, you're good. Oh, 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 you're never
You're never gonna let me down. You're never gonna let me down. You're never gonna let me down. You're never gonna let me down.
You are good, you're good. Oh, you are good, you're good. Oh, and you are good, you're good. Oh, you are good, you're good. Oh.
What's up, everybody? SOS is an international code signal for extreme distress. It's used especially for ships at sea. And although SOS, is just actually, it's a distinct Morse code. It is not an abbreviation. All it means is somebody needs help. That's what the Morse code means. But there's a popular usage of the phrase, and people have assumed it means like save our souls or save our ship. But we wanted to use SOS this summer to talk about the Summer of Serve, an opportunity for all of us as a community to respond to the needs, to the distress signals in our community by lending a hand, by helping those who need some aid or just a lawn cleanup, to just find ways as a church community to show God's love in practical ways with no strings attached. I don't know if any of you have waited tables before. It's a job many of us have had. And maybe you tolerated it. I loved it. I mean, I didn't love like the distinct smell of grease after a shift that seemed to like permeate my whole body. But I loved the energy of the shift and working with different people, and every shift, every table, it was all different, and I enjoyed it. And one of those weird things through all those years, through high school and college working as a server, I would have these nightmares. They were like this stress-filled dreams of where, as I was trying to like serve and make money, but my section was like the whole restaurant, and every table just got sat, and I could never keep up with refills, and it would stress me out. It was really traumatic. I actually still have similar dreams now as a pastor, and I'm not even joking. I have dreams sometimes that I've shown up on Sunday morning to teach, or I showed up, but I didn't know I was supposed to teach, so I'm not ready, and I'm still in my PJs, and the church is like back to being portable in a hotel or a high school, and we're not set up, and everything's going wrong. But anyway, I know that we've all, the waited tables, or it's something we're familiar with, but I want you to think of this. Have you ever thought of God as a waiter? Like serving others isn't just something that God does, especially like in the ways we saw through the life and the ministry and teachings of Jesus. He was a server to people. But I want to show you how this is actually part of who God is. So this is week 1 of a series as we're kicking off the summer and a summer of serve together, where we want to be serving our community. And over the last couple of weeks, we actually wanted to start this as a staff. And so we sent our staff, and we had some volunteers and leaders join in and be part of just going out and serving our communities in different ways, and just beginning to grow in different relationships and opportunities. And we want you to come along with us. We want to go out and serve in lots of ways, and we want to challenge you to go serve and find opportunities for yourself, whether it's at work or in your family or in your neighborhood, to just share God's love in really practical ways with other people. Now, I love doing this kind of stuff as a father. Like, I want to serve and I want to be a good example for my kids. If I'm honest, sometimes when I serve, when I like make us go help somebody move or make us go serve in some way, I really just want to be a good example to them, and that's kind of all it is. But Jesus was a servant, and that probably doesn't shock you, or it shouldn't, because we see him serve all the time. There's verses about how he came to serve, not to be served. But Jesus didn't come to serve and live this life on earth just to set a good example for us. Not in the way that at least I do that for my kids. This was actually part of who he is. And that's why it's so important for us as we begin this series and we begin this summer wanting to serve, by leaning into this truth. Here's the way we'll say it, is that serving is in the nature of God. It's just part of who he is. It's part of how he interacts with us. It's not just something that he does, but it's very much part of his nature and the ways that he loves. And so today I wanted to share with you God's nature and how, to you and I, when we think of serving, we might think of it as weak, or we might think of it as insignificant, because sometimes we think like, well, if I'm not totally changing someone's life, what's the point? Or we might even feel like it's just something we do when we have time, or we might even feel like it's only a waste of time. So if you have a Bible, open up to Luke chapter 12, jump down to verse 35, and we're going to land in this moment where Jesus is speaking to his disciples and teaching them. And listen to what he has to say. We'll start in verse 35. Jesus said, "Be dressed and ready for service. Keep your lamps burning." So there's this sense of be prepared. "Like servants waiting for their master to return from a wedding banquet, so that when he comes and knocks, they can immediately open the door for him. It will be good for those servants whose master finds them watching when he comes." Now, Jesus is using very specific language here. When he says be dressed and ready, to those first century Jewish people, they would have immediately thought of the Exodus story. It's more than just an illustration of be dressed and ready to serve. It connects them with this bigger thing. Luke does this a number of times throughout the Gospel of Luke, where he connects Jesus' teachings and some of the things that happened with the Exodus story. This language, be dressed and ready, comes from Exodus 12, where God was telling the Jewish people, like, you need to be dressed and ready to eat the first Passover meal. There was this urgency, be dressed and ready, be packed for the trip, eat, and we got to hit the road. And it's this very powerful, like, center story for the Jewish people of how they understood themselves as not just descendants of Abraham, but of a people who were slaves in Egypt, but God brought them out of it into a promised land. And the Passover is where they celebrated that every year. And so Jesus uses this language, and he's warning them not to relax and not to take it too easily, and not to think just because you're a follower of Jesus that, everything's fine and you don't have to work hard, or you don't have more to do, or you can just wait around for heaven someday. He's warning them to be ready, because things happen and come upon us in life that we need to be ready for. And so Jesus is warning them then, and you and I, like, don't slack off. Know that things will be difficult in life, that we should be watchful, prepared, and we should be practiced servants. We should be ready to serve all the time, because not only is this in the nature of God, it's meant to be in our nature, but it takes practice. And so, we're familiar with like a master-servant language, not just from the ancient world, but, in our day, we would say more like boss and employee. And so the idea is familiar to us. This is someone who is above, like the master's above in the imaginary org chart. And usually that implies that they're better than us, or more educated, or more important, or more experienced, or older. They're just like greater than us. And the analogy, it's easy to connect some of the imagery, like we're the servants, the master is God, we're waiting for him to return, we should be ready. That makes sense. Or it even makes sense in like God's better, he's smarter, he's greater, of course. But I want you to listen to what happens when God, the master in the story, finds his servants waiting for him. It's just, I don't know, it's not what we would think would be next. Here's what it says in verse 37. "Truly I tell you," now remember, Jesus is saying this, "Truly I tell you, he, the master, will dress himself to serve. He will tell them," us, the servants in the story, "to recline at the table, and he will come and wait on them." of all the things that I imagine someday, like entering heaven and walking past the pearly gates or Jesus returning, I've never imagined that he would ask me to like take a seat, kick my feet up, and ask me if he could take my order. He's going to serve me like that. I don't know. That's just kind of crazy. Also, as a side note, what would you order? Like maybe a tenderloin of a unicorn, or like if God was like, what would you like? What would you say? That has nothing to do with the story. It's just what I thought of as I was reading this. But there's no reason for God to do this. There's no need for him to keep setting a good example. Like in this story, it's like, no, heaven's going to start and we're all going to be there, and yet he's still going to serve us? I mean, he could just be God and we can just worship him. He can just revel in the eternal praise of us because we are so grateful for him, but that is not who God is. It reminds me a little bit of my grandma. My grandma, my whole life, every time you came to her house, it was like an event. Like when I was a kid, every time you got to grandma's house, you got a hug, you got a kiss, and you got a new Hot Wheel car. Every single time, brand new in the package. Like it was always part of it. And she always had the candy bowl full. It was awesome to go to grandma's house. And then even when I got older, like she stopped the Hot Wheels, but every time we came to grandma's house, it was, can I get you a drink? Would you like a sandwich? Do you want some more of this? Why don't you sit over here? She always just wanted to serve on us hand and foot. And my grandma, she had this really weird habit when we would visit. She'd always be like, oh, hey, do you want this thing in the fridge? Like something she had eaten a couple nights ago. And she'd be like, do you guys want this? It's going bad. And I'm like, no, I don't want, do you want me to throw it away for you, Grandma? That's weird to ask. But she just wanted to serve us and love us. Have you ever pictured God that way? I've never thought of God being a lot like my grandma in that way. God is excitedly waiting for us to come home so that he can wait on us, serve us. And that's not the only moment where we catch this nature of God. Not long after this moment in Luke chapter 12, Jesus would really put on display what this looks like in the nature of who he is. What happens is what it becomes known as like the last meal that Jesus has with his disciples. They didn't know it was going to be the last meal in this moment, but they were having a Passover celebration, this traditional celebratory meal for Jewish people every year to remember that Exodus story and how God had saved them and redeemed them and made them his people. And so that night, Jesus would be betrayed. And he met with his disciples one last time to have this meal and tell the story. In fact, it's the longest discourse that we have between Jesus and the disciples in the Gospels. And they're in this upper room that they've borrowed, and this is what happens. Here's the way John, Jesus' one disciple, records this in John 13. We'll read verse 3 first. It says this: Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God, and he was returning to God. Now, when we read that, we know, of course, Jesus has all power. He died, rose again. Of course, he knows he's returning to God. They didn't know that then, but Jesus knows that. Now, before we read what happens next in the next line, I want you to ask yourself, what would you do if you knew God had put all things under your power? If you knew that nothing could stop you or get in the way of you returning to God, how would you choose to use that power, that reality? How would you choose to live in that moment? Watch what Jesus does as he shows you and I what true power does. Verse 4. So he, Jesus, he got up from the meal. He took off his outer clothing. He wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin, and he began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. This is just a text to us, and it's sometimes hard to picture. It's hard to imagine, and it's hard to exaggerate how humbling of a moment this would have been for those disciples. Think of how long this would have taken for Jesus to get changed, to fill the basin. How many people maybe tried to stop him from doing this thing that would have been embarrassing for a rabbi? And how they had to watch each of the 12 around the table get their feet washed until it was their turn. It would have been so humbling. See, Jesus had been telling the disciples for some time that they needed to stop arguing about who was the greatest among the disciples, who's the leader, who's the best. They needed to stop seeing that their association with Jesus was some kind of way for them to think they're better than other people. In fact, he had taught them that if you want to be the greatest in the kingdom of God, it'll be by becoming a servant. He had taught them not to be like others in the world around them who, when they get authority and they get prestige, they use it as an opportunity to lord it over others. And so here in this moment, they have come to this holy, sacred meal together. And there had been this growing sense of excitement because Jesus had arrived just days earlier to a parade. Jesus was beginning to be celebrated, famous. He's going viral. There's an excitement around being associated with Jesus. But at the same time, there had been this growing tension, especially that week. They had come back into Jerusalem, into the heart of the religious center that did not like Jesus. Things were getting a little weird. Tensions were rising. Jesus was teaching harder, more harsh things, controversial stuff, and the religious elite were growing in opposition towards him. Jesus had even kicked off a protest in the temple. And so here in this moment, the culmination of the tension, of the anticipation and the excitement, Jesus puts on display the fullness of who God is. And they would know it in the days to come through his betrayal and his death, and of course in his resurrection. But in this moment, Jesus takes this very sacred story of slavery and redemption and identity. He takes this moment of his greatness, of his true power, and he shows us what real power looks like. Power lays down its life for others. Power serves others. Power doesn't need to be seen as great or be served, but becomes a servant. And so as they gathered around that dinner, they had to watch Jesus become the servant. This is something meant for other people, lower people, not them, not Jesus. And he washed their feet. And so it's like Jesus kind of laid back at that meal and was waiting to see which one of them would step up. I mean, he had been teaching them about these things. And it's like you can imagine each one of them were waiting, going maybe you should go first, or I'm waiting to see if he'll go. And so Jesus steps up and shows them what true servanthood and power in the kingdom of God looks like. And he put on the towel and he washed their feet. I mean, there's just such contrast in this story and moment. He knows that all things have been put under his power. So what does he do with that newly granted power? He washed their nasty feet. Think about this for a second. God is a waiter. Jesus is a foot washer. That is the power of God. He's not looking to us. I mean, this flips everything upside down, doesn't it, for us? We think that the higher you are, what makes you God is that you don't need to be served. And he shows us that's exactly true. I don't need to be served, but I will serve you. And maybe we don't know God at all. When I read a story like that, I'm I have the wrong idea of God. Could it be that the closest to God we'll ever be isn't when we're at a prayer retreat in the mountains, or when we're reciting scripture, or when we're screaming worship songs with tears in our eyes at a Hillsong concert? Maybe the closest that we are to God is when we are serving someone else. So don't miss this. Don't miss this too, even in the story here with Jesus. Don't miss the mundane nature of which Jesus served them. All right, what Jesus did and what we need to do as servants, it doesn't have to be these extravagant gestures. These can be simple, everyday kind of washing feet, waiting tables kind of things. It's simple, and oftentimes it's very overlooked by us as weak or for somebody else, or just honestly a waste of our time. And if I can just get on a little bit of a soapbox for a minute, and I know I can because you can't stop me and I'm just talking, so sorry. But think of this. We are guilty oftentimes of being happy to serve people when we think they can't serve themselves. We are happy to serve when we see them as less fortunate. And so then we think we are doing something for them. And that is part of serving. That is part of the nature of God. That is great for us to do. But that's not what Jesus was doing here. He was serving full-grown men who were perfectly capable of not only washing their own feet, but of washing other people's feet. But he set the tone, and he showed us his heart. And he showed us the heart you and I are to work to have. Many times we only feel like it's worth our time serving if it can really drastically change things. And if not, then we feel like it's not worth it. And that's not what God's showing us. God's showing us just to serve people. Just serve everybody, not just people in need, serve everybody. That's the nature of God. And now Jesus takes this up even a notch. It's his nature to serve in the simple and mundane ways, but then he's willing to go to an extreme with the days that followed this story of the last meal. And it's what's become the center event of our faith, of the ultimate act of sacrifice. Matthew, his apostle, or one of his disciples, recorded it this way in Matthew 20. He said, "The Son of Man," that's Jesus, "did not come to serve, but to serve. And he gave his life as a ransom for many." And that's why we're all still here today talking about his life. Jesus came to earth to serve by sacrificing everything. And this struck me several years ago that Jesus, he didn't have to die on a cross to atone for our sins. He made the rules. He could have died in a far less painful way. He could have died by just missing breakfast and having a hunger pain, or he could have died by having a French guillotine. It would have been far quicker, cleaner, and less pain. But instead, Jesus chose a 6-hour struggle for his life and for every breath after being flogged and beaten by a cat of nine tails. Why would he do that? He wanted to display to you and I his nature, so that he could express to us just how much he loves us by serving us and enduring for us agony. So what does that mean for us? It means let's not just follow the example of Jesus here. Let's embrace this as a part of his nature, and that needs to be a part of ours. Let's work to take the actions of love and grow a heart of servanthood. And just start to serve other people. Big ways, small ways, doesn't matter. If you're not a follower of Jesus, it might be because you've never really heard who God really is. You've always envisioned God as this unfair, disconnected deity who's just waiting for you to screw up in life. And maybe you've never heard that God's a servant. Not that he serves, he is a servant, and he wants nothing from you. He wants everything for you. Or if you are a follower of Jesus, it might mean it's time for you to rethink what it means to be like Christ. It doesn't mean having to have these grandiose plans to change the world. You don't have to start a nonprofit. You can just think of 5 to 10 people that you cross paths with this week and just start praying for them and just start looking for even the smallest of ways to serve them. Or maybe you're at a place where you need to take a more sacrificial, big way of showing love. Maybe it's by taking in a foster care kid out of the system in Michigan and just be there for them. Or maybe it's adoption, or maybe it's really adopting a family that that just needs some extra help and love and care. Or maybe it's taking care of an elderly person whose kids have quit caring for them. I don't know. I just know we are all surrounded by different needs, big ones and small ones. Will you join us in the summer of Serve, and will you work today to be committed, to keep your eyes open for all the little ways that you can be a servant like God?
Throughout this whole series and this summer, we're going to be posting weekly Serve challenges on social media.
And if you don't already follow us on social media, just go to 242community.com/next. And while you're there, read more about what we're doing this summer for our Summer of Serving.
And make sure that you join us right here next week, same time, same place. See you then.